In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Venomous Bloodblade build. This is a level 150 version of the Bloodblade build that incorporates poison elements into it. A lot of people have been asking me for an updated version of the Bloodblade build, and a lot of people have been asking me for a poison build. So in this build, we're merging these two concepts together to get a build that focuses on bleed, damage, and overall attack rating. So the two curved swords we use for this build are the Scavenger's Curved Sword and the Bandit's Curved Sword. The Scavenger's Curved Sword might be the best curved sword in the game in terms of status effects because it has bleeding on it natively, but you can only get one of them on your playthrough unless you have someone drop you another one or you go to NG+, so we're not using two of them here, although that would probably be better for this build in general. The reason we use the Bandit's Curved Sword are obviously because we can't get a second Scavenger's Curved Sword easily, and because it has the highest attack rating when you're setting the blood affinity on the weapon, giving it a good amount of damage. So the setup I like to use is I like to use the Scavenger's Curved Sword in my right hand with the Poisonous Mist weapon skill on it set to the poison affinity. This gives it both blood and poison buildup, and it gives you an ability that can set poison rather quickly, which is going to boost your attack rating because of some of the talismans and the headpiece that we're wearing. And in the left hand, we have the Bandit's Curved Sword with Seppuku on it in order to give it the bleeding affinity and also to give it a buff that increases its bleed buildup as well as its attack power. If you've watched the Bloodblade video at all or are familiar with that build, then you'll know that the general strategy with curved swords, if you're trying to build up status effects, is to do running L1s and to do jumping L1s. This is because the weapons hit twice each really quickly, allowing you to proc status effects fast, and that's exactly what we want to go for here when we're running around on the landscape or attacking bosses. Now, normally when I'm on the landscape, I don't buff up with Seppuku or use Poisonous Mist really at all. I just go for outright damage. One of the things with this build is that even though it has a focus on status effects, really what we're using those status effects for is to boost our attack power via talismans and the headpiece in order to get very high damage with our regular attacks. The status effects are kind of a nice added bonus to that when you rip off a huge chunk of health with hemorrhage, or you set the poison status effect and they tick damage down over time. It's great too. But what we're really using them for is to boost our attack power so that each L1 attack does the most possible damage. When you go into a boss fight or you're about to face a difficult enemy, you'll use Seppuku on the left hand, and then you'll swap back to dual wielding, and you'll run up to the enemy and attack with Poisonous Mist first thing, maybe even attacking with it before the enemy gets in range so that they walk into the mist and the poison gets set on them immediately, and then you can go into your running L1 combo or jumping L1 combo. The armor that I use for this build is the Mushroom Crown on the headpiece. This gives you 10% more attack power when an enemy or yourself is set poison or scarlet rot, which is going to be constantly. You could also use the White Mask for bleeding. The White Mask is probably the better of the two because you can proc it more reliably with Seppuku. However, it's not super important which you choose. I kind of like the look of the Mushroom Crown, but either one will work fine for this build. Besides that, you're going to have quite a bit of endurance with this build because we need it for stamina, because dual-wielding these weapons, attacking with L1 quickly, just depletes our stamina like crazy. So you're going to be able to use substantial armor, which is great because you're probably going to be trading damage sometimes as you're trying to hit as fast as you can with these L1 attacks. Just make sure that you aren't in the heavy medium roll and that you stay below the medium roll threshold with the armor that you're wearing. When it comes to talismans I use for this build, I have the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, and Lord of Blood's Exaltation. Both Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis increase your attack power as you rapidly attack in the game, so this works really well with curved swords, particularly when you're dual wielding them because you attack very quickly, and each hit with each sword builds up your attack power more and more, and when you stack both of these, it can get really high, particularly when you combine it with the attack power that you gain from Kindred of Rot's Exaltation and Lord of Blood's Exaltation. Both Lord of Blood's Exaltation and Kindred of Rot's Exaltation give you plus 20% attack power when you set bleeding or when you set poison. Rot gives it to you when you set poison or scarlet rot, and Lord of Blood's gives it to you when you set the hemorrhage status effect on yourself or an enemy. So Seppuku triggers this on yourself, so you can trigger this very easily without even attacking an enemy, and poison is not hard to build up on enemies, but you can also use it with a consumable item. The Raw Meat Dumpling consumable will actually put poison on yourself instantly, which will trigger the 30% attack power boost from the helmet you're wearing and the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. So you can actually use both of these back-to-back on yourself, which is great because in fights where enemies are immune to blood loss or poison, you can still trigger that attack power boost on yourself and deal substantial damage, which is really what this build is about. So You don't have to worry with this build about finding enemies that are immune, although obviously this build won't be as effective because it can't trigger those status effects, but it'll still perform well if you can boost your attack power, because each swing you do will hit like a truck. You can actually boost your attack power up to about 1200 attack power or attack rating with each of these swords fully buffed, which is absolutely insane. This is probably one of the few builds in the game that can take advantage of all 4 talismans that boost your attack power. It's quite an interesting setup to get all of them, because you need to attack rapidly in order to build up the attack power boost from Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, while also somehow setting poison and bleeding. So it's quite interesting, and you can get just tons of damage out of this build. The stats I have for this build are 50 Vigor, 20 Mind, 32 Endurance, 50 Strength and Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 14 Faith, and 9 Arcane. 50 Vigor is there because you're going to be spamming your L1 attacks with this build, and you're going to trade damage, you're going to get hit. And it's okay to take hits with this build. As long as you win the fight, that's all that matters. Taking a couple hits, coming out on top, triggering that hemorrhage, and getting that poison to tick down on enemies while dealing incredible damage. Doesn't matter if you take a few hits and live, so having that extra vigor there means that this can happen more regularly. 20 Mind is there to give you enough to use Seppuku and Poisonous Mist regularly, but you really don't need a lot of FP for this build. You're going to be running L1s and jumping L1s and just L1 attacks in general, because weapon abilities typically, even when you're dual wielding, only use the main hand weapon for their abilities. So if you're dual wielding, that you're really sacrificing like half of this build by using a weapon ability that only uses one of your weapon hands. 32 Endurance is there because you need stamina for this build. You're just going to chew through your stamina as you're mashing L1. And this allows you a decent amount of protection. And as I said, you do trade damage with this build. So surviving through that with high vigor and high mitigation is going to allow you to just, chip away at enemies until they die while you live. 50 Strength and 50 Dexterity are there because both weapons have C scaling in both of these stats, and they scale predominantly off these 2 stats with this setup. So you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of these. You can put points in Arcane in order to increase the buildup of poison and bleeding. The overall damage you get is low, and the overall buildup you gain from putting points in them is low. I don't personally think it's worth putting 20 or 30 points into Arcane to get another 5 or so points of buildup, or maybe 10 at best, and losing out on like 100 points of attack rating on each weapon. So you can do that if you want, but I highly recommend sticking with Strength and Dexterity with this setup, because we're focusing on your overall attack rating, not just poison and bleed, in order to deal maximum damage per hit, and this way you'll do that. You don't need any intelligence for this build, and 14 Faith is just there because I'm a confessor, so I have that. You could theoretically take one more point here and use Flame Grant Me Strength in order to increase your attack power even more by another 20%. It doesn't boost your attack power, but it boosts your physical damage, and these weapons both attack with physical damage, so it's going to boost that by 20%. And that's another way to further increase this. You could probably get over 1400 attack rating with both of these weapons if you had this up, so that's not a bad idea to do as well. It's a bit overkill if you ask me, but honestly, that's kind of what this game is all about. A couple final tips before I wrap up this video is that first, again, remember to prioritize running L1s and jumping L1s. They hit with 4 attacks almost simultaneously that are going to help trigger status effects. And make sure you lead with Poisonous Mist when you need to face a difficult enemy. This will almost always set the poison status effect right away. It has kind of a long windup, so sometimes you might want to set it early, or start triggering it early. Even if you miss with the actual swing, they'll still walk into the poison mist cloud and get poisoned. And this is going to boost your attack power by 30% right up before you even do one attack. So you definitely want to make sure you get that up in difficult fights, as long as the enemy can be poisoned. And when it comes to the Flask of Wonders physique, I like to use the Thorny Crack tier because this increases your damage as you attack more and more. That's kind of the theme of this build. It's going to increase your overall damage the more attacks you do. So obviously that fits very, very well with this. Additionally, the tier that increases your stamina regeneration is really good for this. As I mentioned, you chew through stamina. And we're not using the Green Turtle Talisman with this build because we're trying to get maximum damage. So you really need that stamina regen when you're in boss fights or difficult fights. So getting that 30% from the one that gives that is really, really strong, and I highly recommend that for this build. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring builds. I am going to be getting to evolutions of a lot of the level 100 builds as we move forward. I'm going to mix in new builds with these so it won't just all be evolutions, but I know I see a lot of people asking for evolutions of like the Hellfire Herald and other level 100 builds, so I will be getting to these. I just want you guys to know that. It just takes time to put these together, and I will get to them as fast as I can.